Hello and welcome to Esri Fire and Emergency Services webinar series. Today we are discussing USAR, Urban Search and Rescue Team's use of GIS for real-time data collection. And we use these webinars to promote the use of GIS in public safety agencies, and specifically with this series, fire and EMS agencies. And what we typically do is we try to find, a relevant use case to present so that you can see that the technology is used in the field and it's helping to build efficiencies into the response. And today we're lucky enough to discuss the use of the technology during recent hurricane responses, both Florence and Michael, but this will focus primarily on Michael. And what we have with us, or who we have with us today, is really a champion of the use of technology and GIS in the field, and Chief TJ Lyon. And we'll introduce him in just a moment, but we're lucky to have him here today to discuss the response. So just a couple of housekeeping items. We will have the ability to answer your questions throughout the webinar. Please use the chat window to ask questions. There'll be 3 interactive poll questions, so please respond to those when you see those come up. We use those to try to, better focus our efforts to serve the needs of the users. So very important to answer those questions for us. The recording will be posted online after the webinar. So a day or two after, you'll be able to go to our webinar website and listen to that, and whenever it's convenient for you, or send it to your peers if needed. And we will email all attendees with links that are relevant to the webinar after we finish today, after the conclusion of the webinar today. So with that, I will turn it over to Chief Lyon so he can introduce himself. Chief, how are you doing today?
I'm doing just fine. Thank you, Mike. Good afternoon or good morning, based on where you're sitting today. As Mike indicated, I from the state of Florida, and I work with the Division of State Fire Marshal. So to put a little context into the topic that I'm covering, the position that I'll be covering, we'll be covering. I'm getting the slide moved there, Mike.
And I am obviously the Fire and EMS Industry Manager for Esri, recently retired from Henrico County, Virginia, after 27 years, and serve as your GIS liaison for the fire service. So you'll have my contact information at the end of the webinar, and if you need any assistance or any information related to the use of GIS for fire and emergency services, please contact me at any time, and we can give some support for those efforts. So I want to just quickly cover some web GIS issues, and the fact that web GIS and the online AGOL community, or capabilities rather, are expanding use daily in the fire service. So easy use is increasing, and we understand the challenges that are faced by fire and emergency services or public safety as a whole. We need to be able to support workflows quickly and ensure mission critical applications can scale, particularly when we'll talk about some during this hurricane response, evacuation maps where millions of people are trying to get information that you're pushing out from that public information role, and being able to incorporate all types of data into your visual products, into your information products. And, an application that supports user requirements, wraps web map into user-friendly applications, and it really organizes your data. I mean, it serves as a communication platform, because you can share information with any stakeholder, any responding agency, any of your mutual aid, or obviously within your own agency. So doesn't matter what radio system they're using, doesn't matter what kind of device they're using, you can easily communicate real-time incident intelligence to those folks that are supporting your response. And I will say that Esri has 90 to 94% of the state and local government market. So most of our responders working for local government or state government already have access to the capabilities we're going to discuss today. And those capabilities allow you to wrap any kind of data and deliver any kind of data, whether it's real-time, large scale data, or local data like parcel or tax layer data, pulling up, what your housing stock or occupancy types are within your community, being able to bring even, basic databases or imagery, satellite data, real-time traffic, real-time weather, into your products to deliver to your incident commanders or your decision makers, and to get the right data to the right people at the right time. And as we get into this, the response in the USAR application that was provided to state and local responders and federal responders during Hurricane Michael and Hurricane Florence, I do want to say this effort was a joint initiative by the International Association of Fire Chiefs and NAPSG, the National Association of Public Safety GIS, and the team they put together truly created an incredible application that was relatively easy to use and provided real-time data to decision makers throughout the states that were impacted by these major incidents. So TJ, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Mike. I appreciate that. So put a little context in the position I'll be sitting in as I discuss the Florida's efforts in support of responding to Hurricane Michael. The Florida Division of State Fire Marshal is, for the state, the lead agency for our ESF4 and ESF9. So we work those rooms pretty much at the same time. A couple of supporting agencies that help with that, of course, is the Florida Forest Service, as well as the Florida Fire Chiefs Association. The Florida Fire Chiefs Association has a statewide emergency response plan, and that plan basically by CEMP supports the Division of State Fire Marshal and is responsible for managing the resources, both management resource throughout the year, as well as locating, requesting, deploying during activations. So here you see in the state of Florida, we are fortunate enough to have 8 of USAR teams throughout the state. 2 of those are federal teams as well, the Florida Task Force 1 and 2 in Southeast Florida. And so for the most part, these teams are located throughout the peninsula of the state of Florida. With the tracking of Hurricane Michael, we were very fortunate in that only one of those teams, the Tallahassee team, Task Force 7, was really under the gun of the storm track and was not able to deploy in advance as the rest did. If you remember Hurricane Irma last year, it was just the opposite, sort of the worst case scenario for us, in that it was scheduled and did come straight up the peninsula after hitting the Keys. So pretty much all of our search and rescue teams, as well as our fire and EMS teams that we would normally stand up, they were pretty much all staying at home, taking care of their local business. So that's quite a challenge for us. So in a way, the track of Hurricane Michael did provide us with the best capability of utilizing our state resources to serve those areas that are impacted. In addition to our search and rescue teams, we also stand up and deploy engine strike teams. We match those up with our technical rescue teams, which gives us sort of a force multiplier, if you will. And they're deployed, with our SAR teams and are able to provide them with some additional capability. Some of our partners that we work with when we deploy, of course, is the Division of State Fire Marshal, the Florida Fire Service itself. After all, they are the owners of all these resources and provide us with the capability of deploying. Our Florida Fish and Wildlife, as well as our Florida National Guard, provide additional search and rescue capabilities with specialized teams. And our Florida Forest Service, we lean on heavy, providing the IMT and additional support needed. So as hurricanes tend to be, they're a noticed event. We have some time to prepare as we start to see, where they might impact our state. In Florida, we, as of last year, started standing up our IMT to help manage our search and rescue efforts throughout the counties that are impacted. And then, of course, as probably all the rest of the states, in advance of landfall, we stand up and pre-stage as many resources as we feel necessary so that they are staged just outside of that impact area. So once the storm makes impact, we can very quickly re-enter and start our search and rescue efforts. So one of the things that we did as of last year during Irma is we recognized a need to really start that planning process a lot earlier, and this really supports a lot of what we do in terms of planning out the use of our GIS tools, is to stand up a planning cell, or a pre-cell, if you would. And so we do that utilizing our Florida Forest Service incident management team. We embed in that team a lot of our state ESF 9 leadership, as well as 4 leadership, as well as include the state EOC, ECO, and their team. So collectively, we start this planning process early. For the purpose of, or for Michael, of course, the storm track was actually scheduled to come right over the top of the state EOC in Tallahassee. So it was, I guess, an advantage to have that incident management team right on site with our state EOC for the first week or so, which supported a lot of increased communications and so forth. So that team, of course, as the storm starts to get closer and we stand up full IMT, they're merged back into that IMT. So we now have an advanced planning process that's well underway.
So TJ, the planning cell is co-located at the state EOC, or at least once you get into operational periods?
Well, in this case, it was simply because that was the track. So our intent is to manage this for all storms, either face-to-face or a combination of that or telephonically. So in some cases, we were dialing out and bringing those key players to that planning cell. And if the storm was going to come into perhaps South Florida, you know, we wouldn't have the luxury of having everybody sitting face to face as we did in Michael. So either way, we're going to hold this planning cell process to give us that advanced planning capability.
Understood.
All right, so Sunday night, I think, is when a lot of us got that typical phone call that we're activating the state EOC. We had a tropical storm, and obviously it had its sights on Florida. And as I had mentioned earlier, as bad as it is for people who live in the Panhandle, in terms of resource availability, it served us better for this particular storm track. So that's 4 p.m. Sunday night. And of course, at 11:35 or so Wednesday morning, the storm made landfall in the Bay County, Gulf County area, Panama City area of the Panhandle. So that's like 68 hours. So, you know, typically we have more time to plan for these things. This storm sort of came out of nowhere and moved very quickly. And so our planning time frame was greatly reduced. All right, so part of the process, as I mentioned earlier, is pre-staging those teams. We used our State Fire College, which has a great facility for both feeding, housing, and parking of our different teams. That's located in the northern part of Central Florida. And then where teams were coming out of their jurisdictions were closer, we staged them pretty much in their own jurisdiction and had them respond directly from that. And I speak not only mostly of the search and rescue teams, but also of our engine strike teams and some of our ambulance strike teams that we put up. So we had one exception to that in terms of responding from their jurisdiction. Florida Task Force 5 in Jacksonville was able to move across the state from east to west and position in Mobile, Alabama, just prior to landfall, which was a great benefit to us because otherwise all of our resources were going to be coming in from the east side of the storm track, and we would not be able to perhaps make it to the west side based on, again, where the actual track was going to occur. So this allowed us to bring our resources in both from east as well as from the west, and it paid us great dividends in the end. Okay, so teams that, you know, were staged, pre-staged, whether they're in their own jurisdiction or in this case, the State Fire College, we took this opportunity to train them on the use of our field data collection tool, the Survey 123 that Mike was speaking of earlier. We had some experience during Hurricane Texas last year as well. So this is just an opportunity that, you know, any chance you can either refresh or in the case of new teams, train them on the use of these tools before they get in theater. And this greatly enhances their capability of using these tools and us getting that information as quickly as possible. So in addition to that, an example of Hurricane Texas, Hurricane Harvey last year in Texas, we deployed under an EMAC a couple of our Swiftwater teams. And in that case, we actually trained them as they were en route to Texas. and that worked out very well. So that just-in-time training for these tools, they're relatively simple to use, but there's some key pieces of information that's important for them to understand. And I think one of those would be their ability to collect this data offline. It's important that the crews know how the system reacts and what selections to make when they can't upload each and every survey that they take. In this case, they save it and then they wait until they re-enter an area where they have comms, and then they upload it at that time. So it can be confusing to the user if they haven't had that instruction and as well as past experiences on how to do that. We also included directions on these tools, the use of them and the access of them in our IAP. So every IAP had that additional direction for crews to use if they needed to refer to that.
That's important to note. Thank you for bringing that up, TJ. That the fact that these applications, these mobile field applications, work in disconnected environments, and Survey 123 is a perfect example, which you just demonstrated. If I could ask real quick, what kind of feedback did you get from the USAR team members or the field personnel as far as the training or the easy use? Or I mean, was there pushback? Was it accepted? Or, I mean, what was the opinion, I guess, you got? Did you get a feeling of that at all?
Well, I think as in anything, they're in the field using these tools, so that issue about making sure they're doing it correctly and that they understand the behavior of the program when it's offline, and ensuring them that they are capturing that data, that the Survey 123 is managing and maintaining their locations for each of their surveys, and it's not being lost. So I think first and foremost, ensuring them and that they can use it and that they're not losing data because they're offline. Once they understood that, I think they were able to grasp that, and the confidence in the program, was obviously increased. As far as the ease of use, I think from my conversations, interviews for post Michael, they were very, it was very easy to use. And I think as in anything, you've got to give those users of that program the ability to later in the day see the fruits of their work by seeing the dashboard, so they can understand what they're entering and how it's being used. So you got to close that loop on these users, make sure they see the benefits of that data. And once they see that, they are champions, and they do such a great job of collecting that data.
Excellent.
So in the state of Florida, of course, we had a couple of ways to divide the projected impact areas. In this case, you're just seeing some avenues of access based on roadways off of the interstate into those areas that we think might be impacted, as Michael is still sitting in the Gulf. In addition to that, our incident management team obviously divided the areas up as well under operational areas.
So with that, we come to our first poll question. So please take a moment to respond. And the question is, does your agency develop incident maps using GIS or spatial data during disasters? And please select one of the following. My agency does not develop incident maps. My agency uses primarily printed mapping products, or my agency employs GIS to provide dynamic map products. So again, does your agency develop incident maps using GIS during disaster? Does not develop incident maps, printed mapping products, or provides dynamic map products. And so, TJ, you'll get into some of your mapping and divisions and divisions rather, and how you laid it out. But important to note that was generated in a manner that you could share, with the EOC, with incident commanders, with task force leaders.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we'll wait and see what the response is to our poll question. And my agency does not develop incident maps is at 14%, primarily printed mapping products at 35%, and a pretty good response. Agency uses GIS to produce dynamic map products at 51%. So excellent response there. So TJ, we'll turn it back over to you.
That is fantastic. So I will tell you that nothing replaces a paper map, when you're out there working, but there's so much more benefit to having the GIS stuff.
Oh, and absolutely, I agree. I mean, we're still printing maps. We have to, right? There's no way around that, at least currently. But the ability to see what you're getting ready to show, real-time data,
yes,
where you can access it is invaluable.
So here's an example of the IMT developing and dividing up the area of operation prior to the storm hitting. So this is a rather wide swath. And obviously, once the storm hits, our job is going to be to narrow this down to the actual impacted area, which they did, and then redefine and reissue and regenerate those maps that can be seen, you know, in everybody's connections, the dashboards, and their, as well as printing updated paper maps. Right. So Michael makes landfall. Again, this is Wednesday afternoon, a relatively quick track from where we had just been alerted to activate. The eye crosses over into Bay County, Mexico Beach, comes on shore, as I understand it, probably just shy of and possibly will be recalculated as a Category 5 hurricane. The strength of this storm was amazing, and its forward speed was a benefit to us because it moved through the state relatively quickly. So around 6 p.m. from my calculations, it was exiting the state of Florida. Still, I think is a Category 2, if I'm not mistaken. Category 1 or Category 2 is based on how close you were to the eye. Obviously, you know, fairly closely landed and went through as projected. Originally, we thought that the storm was going to come over Tallahassee, the center of the storm. So we were actually gearing up for a Category 2, possibly a Category 3. As you can see, it went a little bit west. So in Tallahassee, all we had was a Category 1, so relatively minimal, or I don't think people live in Tallahassee would say that, but relatively minimal damage in comparison. So teams deployed, and as I had said earlier, our Task Force 5 were the closest teams because they were on Interstate 10 heading into the state of Florida from Mobile. So you can imagine sending a state resource out of the state and bringing them back into the state after the storm tracks through. This served us very well. They were able to arrive in theater in Panama City within hours of that storm clearing the state. Setting up and going right to work. So, you know, in a lot of situations, we try and not do operational periods at night. But you know what? You know, never say never. This is a devastated area, and these teams did a great job, and again, started work right away. At the same time, we moved a number of teams into the area. In whole, you can see that, you know, besides our one incident management team, we had 22 USAR task forces. As you can see, 7 of those were from in-state, and then the rest were from out-of-state. Our technical rescue teams, we had 12 engine strike teams, and you can see pretty much the resources that we deployed. So our focus is not just on search and rescue. Obviously, that's our primary interest on the front end, but we're also responsible for managing the fire and EMS needs of those impacted areas, which is the reason we have all the additional resources that typically go beyond the search and rescue. So crews spread out, they start their searches and continue their searches as they start to make it in from the east side as well. So these teams are starting to do their searches and document that using either the Survey 123 tool we spoke of earlier, or in the case of the federal teams, the iron sites. So we had 2 different programs that were collecting this data, and speak a little bit to that in the development of our field data collection tools that was being built under the direction of NAPSIC and in coordination with Esri as well as the IAFC. Those team members that were part of that group that developed that were both from the federal NASAR, national national USAR components, but as well state USAR teams. And so we're very careful to make sure that that information was collected in common ways so that it would populate the map in a common manner. So all the icons and the explanations of those icons, you know, matched up on both programs. That's essential for us to bring that information into the map and make sense out of that. So we brought in our search and rescue teams, obviously from the state. We also had them requested through the federal system, as well as EMAC. And the reason that's important to note is because, again, they used different collection tools, based on how they're being deployed. So our state teams and our EMAC teams used the Survey 123. And then our federal teams use iron sights. In addition to that, 2 of our state teams that would normally be deployed out of state as a federal team, they also used the iron sights in side by side with the Survey 123.
And I think it's important to note here too, TJ, that this, while we've deployed this, you described Harvey, we've deployed this model for a couple of years now, particularly for hurricanes. This was the first year that we had regular planning and coordination between local, state, and federal with input on how we were going to collect data. So NAPSG hosted regular ESF9 calls daily when needed, and so the coordination of both federal, state, or all of them, federal, state, and local resources was pretty impressive in this deployment. So what you ended up with was, even though you had 2 different primary means of collecting data between Survey 123 and iron sights, they were coordinated. Like you said, that data was able to be integrated into one common view to help those folks make decisions and deploy resources.
So that effort was huge. And so in my role assisting the IAFC when an event's outside the state of Florida, goes to doing just what you said, Mike. So helping with the logins, helping with the collection of that data. In this case, since I was had my head down and dealing with our own issues, I saw the benefits of that team and that capability as they helped us work through all the issues that you might find yourself wanting to do with this GIS data, and they did a credible job. And I'll say here, take nothing for granted. Make sure that you've had these conversations with your partners ahead of the storm. For example, our 2 Florida teams that deployed utilizing the iron sights, although they weren't deployed as a federal team. At the end of the day, when they wanted to upload that, there was a little bit of a hiccup because, again, they weren't deployed as federal teams. That was all worked out. But, I mean, don't take that stuff for granted. Talk about it. Make sure that you've, have all that stuff in place and ready to go with as little amount of hiccups as you can. So,
right.
So the access to those to those survey tools, that always is the biggest question. Well, how do we get a hold of that? We don't have a license to operate in the ArcGIS platform. How can we work through that? So I would tell you that the International Association of Fire Chiefs has partnered with Esri and NAPSG, and they have obtained and provide access through licenses during these events. So they provide just an example of a spreadsheet that you would receive based on your request, and we issue those to teams. So we don't issue one for every person's in the field. We issue that login and the unique login and credentials for each of the teams, so that they can use this tool, as well as you heard earlier, that we'll provide that if we need to, just-in-time training in order to use those tools.
And what's pretty effective about this is that all the teams operating in that IFC organization or IFC org, all that data was going to one place. So it was pretty easy to share that data out to whether it was a state EOC or ESF4, ESF9, or even the teams that were responding. So it kind of gave one place for all that data to land, one place for all that analysis to occur. So it's pretty effective in that model.
And so, Mike, to add on to that, those dashboards that the command and control would use to make those decisions, to see what the crews were doing, they didn't stop at the state line. So if you're looking at Florida's data and you want to see what's going on in Georgia, it's on the same map. It's the same data, much like for Hurricane Florence for North and South Carolina. So very, very valuable process and methodology.
Absolutely.
So that survey tool that we were using, pretty much this is some couple of screenshots from that. It's very easy. You can see on the very left where it said create new, edit existing, or upload data. Those are the things we want to make sure that the teams understand, what the purpose of those are. So that allows you to to save that data in your outbox and then upload that when you become get into some areas where you have communications, and then again upload it. Otherwise, if you have a live connection, it's just going up every time you use it. It's very simple to use, and again, it has some incredible detail as well as the ability to attach pictures. So all this stuff is being collected by all the search and rescue teams. And so it's provided in one location, one dashboard. This is invaluable to our field commanders in terms of managing, the success of their teams and what's left to do and setting up that next operational period. So I can't speak to how important this is, and having this visibility available to anybody who needs it, both on the ground in those command and controlled areas, as well as in state EOC or anywhere in between. So it's just an incredible tool.
And so not only were they doing real-time data collection that was immediately being transmitted back to that command post or back to that task force leader, as long as they had connectivity, but you were tracking resources as well, correct?
Yes. So that anytime somebody takes a survey, we know where that team is at, and that pretty much sets a spot on the map, an icon, and I'll explain a little bit about the benefit of that. Is that what you were referring to, Mike, when you asked that question?
And there's actually some real-time tracking occurring for the teams as well, so you could actually see where they were, and there's actually the ability to see a breadcrumb trail or a historical view of where the teams traveled, which was, to me, important if you're looking at doing secondary searches or where we completed damage assessment and where we not. You could see where the teams had been operating or where they had not been operating based on that data being collected through the applications.
Yes, absolutely. So here's an example of that dashboard. And if you think about this, just looking at these icons, these waypoints, and the reference you get when you look at the reds versus the yellows versus the greens, it gives you a very good awareness of where the crews are seeing damage, where they have been, and equally important, where they have not been. So we were instructing our crews not just to take surveys of areas where the damage is at, but if they come across some areas that where there is no damage, do a survey, and that sort of helps us paint that line of where the damage starts to decrease or where there's no damage in comparison to those areas that are harder hit. So that clearly illustrates it on a map. Again, pictures just worth 1,000 words. So the pop-up, again, shows you an exact picture of that. Very important, and so you can imagine for the incident commander's view how much this plays in their decision-making process. So it's important, I think, again, I said this earlier, allow those users in the field that are collecting this data to see these dashboards when they come back in and have that opportunity, so they can see exactly how it's being used. For case in point, if you hold your cell phone in a oblong configuration, as to put, when you take that picture, this picture would be sitting on its side. So it's important in the training to cover that. Hold your phone up the normal way that you take a picture, and having them see the outcome of this supports their use of the tool itself. And so, and as mentioned earlier, this is all available to anybody who has logins to get in to see this information. So it's not just one location. It's everybody that has a part to play in the process. So the state EOC sees this, the incident command team sees this, the local command and control sees this. You can imagine how well this seeing this detail both helps in making those decisions, at the command level, as well as helps to answer some of those questions that are always being asked, out of theater. Nothing replaces the paper maps, but those paper maps are being generated by this GIS product, so therefore it aligns, it shows all the detail, and that's very important to note.
So we've come to our second poll question. And please respond. Is your agency sharing a GIS-based common operating picture to outside participating agencies? And the options here are: we provide paper map products only, we use GIS map products within our own agency, or we provide cloud-based mapping to participating agencies. So again, is your agency sharing a GIS-based common operating picture to outside participating agencies? And this is right in line with what TJ was describing as far as, sharing that dashboard view, that common operating picture with instant command posts, task force leaders, even the operators from the USAR teams. And TJ, correct me if I'm wrong, but state EOCs also had access to it, correct?
Absolutely, absolutely, yes.
Yeah, I know, and some FEMA personnel at the federal level, and even in DC, were accessing that information just to see that common operating picture and understand where resources were being committed, and where the activity was occurring. And so we've got our answer now: is your agency sharing GIS-based common operating pictures to outside participating agencies? And we provide paper map products only is at 15%. We use GIS map products within our own agency at 39%. That's still a good answer. And we provide cloud-based maps to participating agencies at 46%. So pretty good use of GIS in that question. TJ?
Excellent. And I'll tell you, when it comes to sharing this dashboard, beyond what you would think in terms of the area of operation, the state EOC, even at home for the agency providers. So the agencies that are providing their resources, they want to know where their crew's at. They want to make sure that they're okay. And giving them access to see this, answers tremendous amount of questions, and saves a lot of those otherwise telephone calls and follow up. So I can't overstate how important it is to again share this information, so everybody shares that same common understanding and operational picture. So our command and controlled partners were working using this data that's being collected to organize and conduct and track and complete those searches they're doing, whether they're the hasty search, the primary, the secondary. So they're able to export this information and provide those percentages updates, if you would, to the state EOC and as well to the county emergency managers. After all, that's what they're there. They're there assisting those counties and their leadership, providing this search and rescue capability, sharing with them the completions and all this data. So I didn't mention that earlier, but the County Emergency Management Agency, they are the ones who are there serving. And first and foremost, short of the safety of our personnel, they need to know this information. They need to be part of that process, and they need to tell us anything that we're not meeting that in terms of their needs. So these common operating pictures do a great job in answering and providing with that information. All right, so you can imagine here's a picture of a screen. This is in the ESF49 desk. I have one of my main floor, a big floor leaders come in, and he has a request in from the governor or one of the senators that their family members have indicated to them that it's 2 days into the operation. Nobody's been in their neighborhood. There are people that are dying. You name it. I mean, you hear all sorts of things. Many of which are not accurate, but you get that information by the time it's delivered to you. Who knows if it's how accurate it was in terms of its original collection. But when you have somebody coming up to you and say, hey, we have this request. Have you been in this neighborhood? Have you searched this area? When you can pull up a map and show the street and show exactly what crew was there and what they found, and then further open up a couple of pictures of that area, you can imagine how well that goes to answering their question and settling that concern down, and we can now get right back to the business at hand. So I got to tell you, I can't tell you how many times that showing this to the people that had those concerns and questions, how accurate and how complete this provides the answers they're looking for. It also further assists us in making guiding us in our discussions and those decisions that we need, again, as we talk about the challenges of achieving all the search that we're after and anything that we're dealing with in a very real world live data format.
And it's, when you look at that dashboard, to be able to see that data analysis, in the main view, it's at the bottom, but to be able to just tell somebody, look, we've had almost 2,000 victim contacts. We've had over 40,000 damage assessments. To be able to have that kind of data analysis and present that, like you said, to decision makers or elected officials. It's pretty powerful.
Very powerful. So, additional detail is brought in as it's requested. In this case, the flood inundation detail. We had health providing us with missing persons detail. They were able to put the XYs to that, and then we were able to consume that into another layer. So you can imagine, as you're trying to search areas and again, resolve these issues, to have that additional detail was very beneficial to our crews and assisted them in getting that job done and answering those questions that are being raised. So one of the other challenges that we found is, again, ESF 4 and 9, is the impact that this hurricane has had on all of our local fire departments and their capabilities of continuing to provide the services that they need to provide, and where we can help them. What are the long-term challenges that we have? So we very quickly, again, just-in-time training, just-in-time application building, we requested of the IAFC and of NAPSIC and of Esri, and they delivered. They provided us with a fire station critical infrastructure assessment tool, much the same as the Survey 123 application you saw earlier for damage assessments, except this one was created to answer the specific questions that we wanted to regarding the fire stations in that area. And so we had them build this tool, and they built it, I think, within a matter of a day. They actually built it in a matter of hours. Then our teams worked with them to make a few modifications that to serve our needs. In this case, we put together some teams that were brought in to help with conducting their surveys right alongside all the rest of our teams that were doing search and rescue and 911 augmentation. So here's an example of that tool, a couple of screenshots, pretty much the same ease of use that you saw on the previous application. You were collecting such things, obviously, as who the inspector is that's coming out to take a look at that particular fire station facility, information about that facility, whether they're on generator power, regular power, no power, their capability of housing people, all that good information. So very quickly, we're able to start to collect up all the things that we wanted to know about those fire stations.
Excellent. That's, think about that being applied to any critical infrastructure assessment, not even during a storm, but, prior to an event. So if you're just trying to catalog and rate, the threat of to the critical infrastructure, that's an excellent tool to go out in the field and be able to do those kind of surveys. So we're to our third and final poll question. That should be opening up. Yep, here we go. Is your agency deploying mobile applications in the field to collect incident data or track personnel? And four options here. We are not currently performing data collection. We collect incident data and manually update our products. We use mobile applications to provide real-time updates using GIS, or we use mobile apps to track our personnel in real time. So is your agency deploying mobile applications in the field to collect incident data or track personnel? And so, TJ, I was pretty impressed with with the fire station. Obviously, gave you a good picture of what a locality's capabilities were, who was in service, who was out of service. Where do we need to move? What are our hot sites for our fire stations? Kind of that continuity of operations assessment, really.
Exactly. And prior to having this kind of a tool available to show us that picture that we want to see, you're dealing with miscellaneous conversations, emails, secondhand information, and it's very difficult to get a really good handle, on what you need to do and where it needs to be done.
Perfect. So we should be getting our answers here. So is your agency deploying mobile applications in the field to collect incident data or track personnel? We are not currently performing data collection at 23%. We collect incident data and manually update our products at 37%. We use mobile applications to provide real-time updates at 38%. That's a big number, larger than I thought it would be. And we use mobile apps to track our personnel in real time at 14%. Excellent. TJ, turn it back over to you.
That's very good. That's just excellent to see that. So I'll show you a little bit about how that survey looked. So you can see here, in this particular image, we have 187 fire stations that were visited. I can very quickly look and see, based on the color of those waypoints, those dots, the level of damage that was secured. So, this gives us something to work on. We can open this up and see great detail, and station by station, to deal with, what it is they need, what can we help them with, and, what's the long-term forecasts. So as they're collecting this data up, as you can see, you can select any one of these sites, open up, and it'll give you all the detail of those questions and answers that are part of that survey, as well as provide up to 3 pictures for each of those surveys that, again, provide an incredible amount of information in the form of a picture. So not only are we collecting the facility information, it's XYZ Fire Department, but we're also collecting the status of the unique capabilities in terms of housing people, apparatus, placement, parking. And equally important is, you didn't see on the survey itself, but prior to the storm, how many fire engines were you running? After the storm, how many can you run today? So we do that for engines, ambulances, tank tenders, you name it, brush trucks. So very quickly, we have a sense of, prior to the storm, what their capabilities were, and post-storm, what their capabilities were. So it was a great tool, and it provided us with some very actionable information. So the state fire marshal was able at that point to determine more closely and isolate those areas where we needed to provide additional help in securing perhaps loaner apparatus as well as temporary facilities.
So that's amazing. That actually impacted how you deployed resources post-event.
Oh, absolutely.
That's incredible. Excellent use of the technology there to serve the responders. I mean, I think that's wonderful. Just a couple of reminders here as we wrap up and try to get to a couple of your questions. The Esri Federal GIS Conference is January 29th and 30th in Washington, D.C. It's an excellent group, maybe 5,000 or 6,000 folks, and a lot of federal state agencies. So you get, a lot of the FEMA and DHS related to disaster response. So an excellent event to attend. And then, of course, our big event, the National Security and Public Safety Summit that precedes the main users conference. That's July 6th through 9th in San Diego. If you've never attended, it's the pre-conference is, several hundred folks, but they're all public safety. So you have, real use case presentations, much like what you sat through today, delivered by folks that are actually, using that technology in the field. So I wanted to just show a couple of links that may be relevant. What you see here is obviously the state of Florida's Fire Marshal Office link, International Association of Fire Chiefs, NAPSG, and then the next one down is the NAPSG IFC SAR story map. And again, this will come out in an email to users, and it will be on the recorded webinar that you'll have available in a day or two. But I wanted to make sure everybody understood that on the IFC org, NAPSG has put together a story map that describes the entire search and rescue project, the initiative that you just saw described through this use case by Chief Lyon. And again, you'll get that information in an email or be able to see it on the webinar replay. And a couple of questions, if I can get to them. So one of the questions, TJ, is, did you use the new laser rangefinder offset options with ArcGIS? And you may not be familiar with that, TJ, but we do have that capability. And as far as I know, it was not used during the storm response. Did you see any, as far as during the Survey 123 collections or collector collections, anything using the laser where you didn't have to actually be adjacent to the structure? Are you familiar with that?
No, I'm familiar with the technology, but I don't have any knowledge of us using that for Michael.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, I wasn't aware of it either. So were there any issues with Teams? I'm sorry, were there any issues with connectivity on the Teams smartphones? So you did have, if I recall, some connectivity issues that first operational period or so?
We did. So, as in any operation, probably the first operational period is probably your biggest challenge. That's where you're going to find out how well you were able to instruct the crews. In some cases, maybe not all people were trained. So we did have some low numbers. I think when we first started looking at the dashboard, the very first operational period was coming to an end, and we didn't see a lot of waypoints in the plan. Part of that again was, I think, in part because we took for granted that the Iron Sight tools being used by the non-federal teams would have been uploaded immediately, and it took a little while to get that. And then additionally, a lot of questions and a lot of misunderstanding on how the tool would work offline and whether it was able to maintain the XY coordinates as it was being used, which of course it can. That message was clearly, I guess, reissued or re-provided to the crews. And I tell you, it was like somebody turned the switch on. Second operational period, the map just blew up with all the stuff that wasn't uploaded initially at the end of the first operational period, but now was being uploaded, as well as the next operational period that was being uploaded without a problem.
Excellent. So did you note any challenges with hardware? So, phones versus tablets, or personal devices versus, government-owned devices. Did you see any of that or have any issues?
In some of my conversations with the crews, most of them were using, smartphones. The batteries, were always a problem in terms of sucking up the battery juice. Maintaining, spare batteries was essential. I think a lot of that knowledge was garnished through our response to Harvey as well as Irma the year before. So I think a lot of people, knew that ahead of time and were able to get through that. So I don't know of any real problems that weren't overcome.
Excellent. Excellent. So with that, we'll wrap up. I certainly want to thank you, Chief Lyon, and State Fire Marshal's Office from Florida, Division Fire Marshal's Office, and our partners at International Association of Fire Chiefs, and certainly our partners at NAPSIG for their support of this initiative. It's incredibly successful. There are additional questions, quite a few actually in the list, so Chief Lyon and I will review those and respond directly to the questions that were submitted. But thank everyone for attending, and the recording of the webinar will be available in a day or two on the Esri website. Thank you all, and thank you, TJ.
You're welcome. You bet.